I just wanted to help a stranger, even if that stranger was a Hell's Angel. I never imagined that simple act of kindness would put a target on my back and earn me an army. The squeal of the cash register was the soundtrack to my life. Another 12-hour shift at the dusty, forgotten gas station on the edge of town. Another night spent watching the clock tick slower than a snail in molasses. I was 18, saving every dime I could for community college, trying to help my mom with the rent since my dad passed. Every dollar was a step, however small, towards a future that didn't smell like stale coffee and gasoline. The bell above the door didn't just jingle that night. It seemed to gasp. He walked in, and the entire atmosphere of the tiny store changed. He wasn't just big. He was a mountain range in black leather. His beard was a wild, gray-streaked mess. His face was a roadmap of hard miles and harder fights, and his vest was covered in patches. But one patch stood out, right over his heart, a flaming skull with wings. I didn't need to be a genius to know what that meant. This wasn't some weekend warrior on a Harley. This was the real deal, a Hell's Angel. He lumbered over to the counter, dropping a couple of energy drinks, a bag of beef jerky, and a bottle of water. He moved with a kind of heavy, deliberate grace that was almost scarier than outright aggression. I kept my eyes down, my hands moving automatically. "That'll be $13.75, I mumbled, my voice barely a squeak. He grunted and pulled out a wallet that looked like it had been through a war. He slid a credit card across the counter. I swiped it. Declined. My blood ran cold. Sir," I stammered. It didn't go through. Do you want to try it again?" He snatched the card back, his eyes narrowing. He looked less angry and more tired, frustrated. He swiped it himself on the customer-facing machine. Declined. He tried another card. Declined. He let out a low growl, a sound that seemed to rumble up from the center of the earth, and slammed a fist on the counter. It wasn't a violent slam, but it was heavy enough to make the entire rack of cheap sunglasses next to the register tremble. "Piece of junk," he muttered, more to himself than to me. Every instinct I had, every stereotype my uncle ever drilled into my head about guys who looked like this, screamed at me to keep my head down, to just say, "Sorry, sir," and wait for him to leave. This was not my problem. Getting involved was the fastest way to get hurt. But then I saw his eyes. Under the furrowed brow and behind the intimidating scowl, I saw a flash of raw, human frustration. The kind of look my dad had when his truck broke down on the way to a job he couldn't afford to miss. My grandma always used to say, "You don't judge a book by its cover, Marcus. You judge a man by what he does when he's in a corner." Before I could stop myself, the words were out of my mouth. "Hey man, I got it." He froze. His head snapped up, and he stared at me, his eyes like two chips of granite. "What did you say, kid?" My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought he could probably see my shirt moving. I swallowed hard and pulled my own worn-out wallet from my back pocket. It held the $43 I had to my name until my next paycheck. I said, "I've got it. It's on me." He just stared at me, his expression unreadable. "Why?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. I shrugged, trying to look casual, trying to make my hands stop shaking as I pulled a 20 out of my wallet. "Looks like you're having a rough day. We all have 'em." I paid for his stuff, the register drawer popping open with a sad little cha-ching. I counted out his change and pushed it, along with his bag, across the counter. He didn't move. He just watched me, his gaze intense, like he was trying to see straight through me. I thought for a second he was going to refuse, or worse, get angry that I'd insulted his pride. Instead, he slowly scooped up the change, grabbed the bag, and turned to leave. He paused at the door, his hand on the handle. He didn't turn around all the way, just looked back over his massive shoulder. "I'm Grizz," he grumbled. "I don't forget." Then he was gone, the door jingling softly behind him. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for 5 minutes and sank against the counter, my legs feeling like jelly. I had just given my last $20 to a Hell's Angel. My mom was going to kill me. The next 24 hours were a blur of regret and anxiety. I kept replaying the moment in my head. What a stupid, stupid thing to do. I went to my second job the next afternoon, waiting tables at the Greasy Spoon Diner, feeling like an absolute fool. I was wiping down a table by the big front window when I heard it. It started as a low vibration in the soles of my shoes, a distant rumble like a coming thunderstorm. But it grew, fast. It became a deep, guttural roar that vibrated the plate glass windows of the diner. I looked up, and my heart stopped. It was a river of chrome and steel, a fleet of motorcycles pouring into the diner's parking lot. There weren't 10 or 20. There had to be at least 50 of them. They moved with a terrifying, organized precision, forming a perfect semicircle around the entrance. The sound was deafening, a chorus of engines that shook the entire building. Then, as one, they all went silent. The sudden quiet was even more menacing. At the very front of the pack, on the biggest, blackest bike of them all, was Grizz. He swung his leg off his bike and stood up, looking even bigger in the daylight. He scanned the diner, and his eyes locked right onto mine through the window. A knot of pure ice formed in my stomach. This was it. I'd offended him somehow. He'd come back with his entire army to finish what he started. He lifted a thick-gloved finger and pointed straight at me. Then he turned to the sea of leather-clad men behind him, and his voice boomed across the parking lot, a command that froze the blood in my veins. That's him. Get him. My boss, Sal, a portly man with a grease-stained apron and a heart of gold, grabbed my arm. "Marcus, back room, now!" he hissed, his face pale. But I was frozen. A deer in the headlights of 50 roaring Harleys. It was too late. The diner door swung open, and they began to file in. They didn't rush. They moved with a slow, deliberate purpose that was 1,000 times more terrifying. The jingle of the bell was replaced by the thud of heavy boots on linoleum and the creak of worn leather. The few other customers in the diner flattened themselves against the vinyl of their booths, trying to become invisible. Sal stood protectively in front of me for a second, then seemed to think better of it, as a biker the size of a refrigerator gave him a dead-eyed stare. A path cleared down the middle of the diner, and Grizz walked through it like a king inspecting his troops. He stopped right in front of my table, the one I'd been wiping down moments before. The rag was still in my hand. He loomed over me, casting a shadow that swallowed the entire booth. I could smell the road on him, a mix of exhaust, leather, and stale cigarette smoke. This is how it ends, I thought. Over $13.75. I closed my eyes, waiting for the impact. Instead, I heard a heavy thump on the table. My eyes snapped open. Sitting on the Formica tabletop, right next to the salt and pepper shakers, was a canvas bank bag. It was bulging, so full that the zipper strained to hold it shut. Grizz reached out, not to hit me, but to unzip the bag. He tipped it over. Out spilled a waterfall of cash. 20s, 50s, hundreds. It wasn't a neat stack. It was a chaotic pile of rumpled, worn bills. More money than I had ever seen in my entire life. I stared at the pile, then back up at his weathered face, my mind completely blank with confusion. "My daughter was in the hospital," Grizz said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the silence of the diner. "Had a seizure. My cards got frozen 'cause I was 3 states from home. Bank thought it was fraud. I had no gas, no cash, and my phone was dead. I was about to lose my mind." He jabbed a thick thumb towards the pile of money. "I don't forget," he said, echoing his words from the night before. "And neither do my brothers. We take care of our own. And last night, kid, you were one of our own." One by one, the other bikers started walking up to the table. They weren't there to hurt me. They were there to pay me. Each one reached into their vest or their jeans and pulled out cash, a 10, a 20, some even a 50, and dropped it onto the growing mountain on my table. No one spoke. It was like a silent, sacred ritual. My head was spinning. I was a broke kid working 2 jobs to barely scrape by, and now there was probably $10,000 sitting in front of me on a sticky diner table. "For your college," Grizz said, seeing the look on my face. "For your mom. For whatever you need. You showed a man respect when he was at his lowest. The angels pay that back. Always." Tears pricked my eyes. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees, washing over me. This was a miracle, a genuine, life-altering miracle delivered by an army of leather-clad angels. My future, which had been a blurry, uncertain path, suddenly snapped into sharp focus. Grizz seemed to read my thoughts. He clapped a hand on my shoulder, heavy and warm. "Debt's paid," he said with a gravelly finality. He turned to leave, his brothers parting for him once more. The whole ordeal was over in less than 5 minutes, but as he reached the door, he stopped again, just like he had at the gas station. He turned back, and the weary frustration in his eyes was gone. It was replaced by something harder, colder, something that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "There's one more thing, kid," he said, his voice dropping low, all traces of warmth gone. "We don't do things quiet. Someone saw us pull in here. Someone from another club. The Serpents." He let the name hang in the air. Even I had heard of the Serpents. They were bad news, vicious, unpredictable, and they had a long, bloody history with the angels. "They saw us give you this." He gestured to the pile of money. "They saw an angel thank you. In their world, that doesn't make you a hero. It makes you a target. It makes you a friend of their enemy." He looked me dead in the eye, his gaze pinning me to my seat. "We paid our debt, kid, but we also just painted a giant bullseye on your back." The silence Grizz left behind was heavier than the roar of their engines had been. The pile of money on the table suddenly didn't look like a miracle anymore. It looked like bait. Sal finally scurried out from the kitchen, his eyes wide as saucers. "Marcus, what in God's name was that?" he whispered, staring at the cash. I couldn't answer. The bullseye Grizz mentioned felt like a physical weight on my chest. The rest of the day was a paranoid nightmare. Every car that slowed down outside the diner, every customer who looked at me for a second too long sent a jolt of fear through me. I packed the money into my backpack, the weight of it feeling more like an anchor than a lifeline. When my shift ended, I practically sprinted the 6 blocks home, my head on a swivel, jumping at every shadow. That night, I barely slept. I sat in the dark of my small bedroom, staring at the backpack full of my future and my potential doom. The Serpents. The name was poison. They were known for preying on the weak, for violence that was as senseless as it was brutal. Grizz hadn't been making a threat. He'd been giving me a warning. The Angel's code was about respect and retribution. The Serpent's code was about chaos and fear. The next day, the fear followed me back to the gas station. It was a bright, sunny afternoon, the kind that usually felt hopeful. Today, it just felt exposed. Around 3 p.m., a low-slung, matte black car with tinted windows pulled up to the pumps. It wasn't a bike, but my stomach twisted into a knot anyway. 3 men got out. They didn't wear club vests, but they didn't need to. They wore the same swagger of casual menace, their arms covered in serpentine tattoos. The Serpents. The leader, a wiry man with cold, dead eyes and a snake tattoo that coiled up his neck, walked straight into the store. His 2 goons stayed by the car, watching. He didn't grab an energy drink or beef jerky. He just leaned against the counter, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Heard you came into some money," he said, his voice a low hiss. "Heard you're friends with those angel clowns." I tried to keep my voice steady. "I don't know what you're talking about." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Don't play dumb, kid. We saw the whole show yesterday. Pretty little charity drive. Now, here's how this is going to work. You're going to give us that money. We'll call it a tax. A tax for operating in our town. You do that and we let you keep breathing." My mind raced. I could give them the money. My life was worth more than college tuition. But it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the look in my dad's eyes when he was backed into a corner. It was about Grizz's gruff gratitude. It was about the fact that for one moment I had done something good and selfless, and I'd be damned if I let these thugs twist it into a victory for bullies. Taking a deep breath, I looked him right in the eye. "No." The smirk on his face vanished. "What did you say?" I said no. That money was a gift. It's for my education. It's for my mom. It's not for you. He pushed himself off the counter, his eyes flashing with rage. "You just made a big mistake, college boy." He turned and nodded to his men outside. They started walking towards the door. This was it. I grabbed the old heavy fire extinguisher from under the counter, my knuckles white. It wasn't much, but I wasn't going down without a fight. Just as the two goons reached the door, a sound split the air. It wasn't the roar of 50 Harleys this time. It was the distinct, deafening blast of a shotgun. The serpents all froze. Parked quietly across the street, almost hidden behind a landscaping truck, was a single, beat-up pickup. In the driver's seat was Grizz. The shotgun was resting on his open window, aimed not at the serpents, but at the front tire of their car. He hadn't been threatening me yesterday. He had been warning me because he knew this would happen. And he hadn't left me to face it alone. Grizz didn't say a word. He just racked the shotgun again, the shuck-shuck sound echoing in the sudden silence. It was a clear, unmistakable message. The serpent leader looked from Grizz's cold stare to the shotgun, then back at me. The rage in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of fear. He snarled, a silent promise of future trouble, but then jerked his head at his men. They backed away from the door, jumped in their car, and sped away, their mission a failure. Grizz watched them go, then slowly lowered the shotgun. He caught my eye from across the street and gave me a single, slow nod. It was a nod that said everything. I told you I don't forget. We take care of our own. Then he put the truck in gear and pulled away, disappearing as quietly as he'd appeared. I never saw Grizz or his army of bikers again, but I never forgot. I used the money for college, got my degree, and eventually bought my mom a small house in a better neighborhood. The serpents never bothered me again. Word must have gotten around that the quiet kid at the gas station was, for some reason, under the permanent, invisible protection of the Hells Angels. Sometimes when I hear the distant rumble of a motorcycle, I think of Grizz. I think about how the scariest-looking man I'd ever met showed me more kindness and honor than a dozen respectable people. He taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up for you when you're in a corner, and that you should never ever judge a book by its leather-bound, patch-covered, intimidating cover.